Welcome back everyone to the channel. Chipmunk here. Today I have another video in my continuing series on the #1 American bestseller from every year. Usual disclaimer, this is according to Publishers Weekly, which is the oldest list I could find. And that too is according to Wikipedia, which states that they're not quite clear on the criteria that make the #1 bestseller. That said, again, most accurate list I could find. So, long story short, I'm not very good at disclaimers. Today we have the bestseller of 1908. And if you have been following this list, it's not really going to be a surprise. Because the bestseller of 1908 was Mr. Crewe's Career, written by Winston Churchill. Now, if you haven't been following these videos, this is not that Winston Churchill. There were two of them, and this one at the time was more popular. He was an incredibly popular author, and this is his 4th entry on the #1 bestseller list. That's how dang popular he was. It's also not his last entry. Stay tuned. I usually go into a bit about the author, but I have done that, so just refer back to one of my last videos. What was the first one? Oh, the first one for him was the bestseller of 1901. This novel was published by the Macmillan Company in New York and clocks in at a skinny little 498 pages. A quick side note, I love getting used books, especially when there's something personal in them. This one I obtained off eBay, and it has a dedication in it from which I learned something. The dedication states, "It is a gift to the Keewaydin Camps" by Graham French. And although I have no idea who Graham French was, sadly, a little internet research told me that the Keewaydin Camps, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but they are still up and running. They are a set of children's camps, largely. They began life in 1893 as a canoe trip camp in Maine. They moved to Canada in 1901, were well established as an older boys' camp by 1904. They grew and expanded over the years, adding a camp for younger boys, for girls, for families, etc. Today, they operate 4 separate camps, both in Canada and Vermont, including an education center. So this book was kind of already an education center for me right off the bat. And that's pretty neat. I love that. Anyway, the book. As with every other Churchill book, at least that I've read, this is more or less a tale of American historical fiction. That's what he's written up until this point. However, this one was pretty much present day at the time, very unusual for him. Dealing with his native New England, as he so often did, this book tells about the railroad barons using politics to maintain a chokehold of power in New Hampshire. This was both the era of robber barons and reform, Theodore Roosevelt, etc., etc. Now, in this book, a newcomer to the state, the Mr. Crewe of the title, he is a man of big ideas and big ideals. He determines to run for elected office, but he really only understands the depth of corruption once he gets into the state senate and finds his big ideas sidelined. Not being a man to give up, he decides to make a run for governor instead, and that is the bulk of the book. However, Crewe is actually a supporting character. The main focus here is on Austin Vane, the young and honest lawyer, son of the main lawyer, the representative for the railroad. And what's neat here is that although he and his dad, Hilary Vane, are both on opposite sides, both very definitely on opposite sides for the bulk of the novel, they both maintain respect for each other, particularly Austin for his father. We also have Victoria Flint, who is not only a love interest for Austin, but she is the daughter of the railroad magnate who employs Hilary Vane. And she's more than that. She is a smart, clever, well-spoken woman who thinks for herself and refuses to marry before she's ready. And I see this a lot in Churchill's novels, to his credit. An idealized woman, perhaps, but a woman who is smart and capable enough to think for herself and speak up about it. No shrinking violets here. Another thing about Churchill is that his novels often intersect, particularly Richard Carvel and successive novels being about the same family different generations. This one is not part of that, but it's in that vein because this novel is a sequel of sorts to Coniston, which I covered a couple videos ago. It's set in the same area with many of the same characters mentioned. It's just sometime in the future. It is the Churchill verse, if you will. And also there's the fact that Churchill did in fact try an unsuccessful run for governor in his state, and he used many of those experiences in this book. So as to my thoughts on the book, this was a good one. I mean, really, we haven't had a bad one yet. I did like this a little better than the last book I read, the bestseller of 1907. I just felt this held together a little better as a story. In what I now recognize to be Churchill fashion, the book uses the plot as a vehicle to make very pointed political statements, and many events, comments, and even characters seem not so far removed from the present when you remove the trappings of the fashions and style speaking of the time. Humans always were, and shall continue to be, very human. I know that's a newsflash, but somehow it seems like we need reminding of it every so often. So, without further ado, let me just share some of the parts that really stuck out at me. Okay, and there's just a little bit when Austen and his father are arguing, but respectfully. Remember that? It's a wonderful thing. Austen shook his head sadly as he gazed at his father. He had always recognized the futility of arguments, if argument on this point ever rose between them. "It's no use, Judge," he said. "If material prosperity alone were to be considered, your contention would have some weight. The perpetuation of the principle of American government has to be thought of. Government by a railroad will lead in the end to anarchy. You are courting destruction as it is." "If you came in here to quote your confounded Emerson," the Honorable Hillary began, but Austen slipped around the table and took him by the arm and led him perforce to his chair. "No, Judge, that isn't Emerson," he answered. "It's just common sense, only it sounds to you like drivel. I'm going now, unless you want to hear some more about the plots I've been getting into. But I want to say this. I ask you to remember that you're my father and that I'm fond of you, and that if you and I happen to be on opposite sides, it won't make any difference as far as my feelings are concerned. I'm always ready to tell you frankly what I'm doing if you wish to know. Goodbye. I suppose I'll see you in Ripton at the end of the week." And he pressed his father's shoulder. Mr. Vane looked up at his son with a curious expression. Perhaps, as when Austen returned from the shooting of Mr. Blodgett in the West, there was a smattering of admiration and pride in that look, and something of an affection which had long ceased in its strivings for utterance. It was the unconscious tribute, too, slight as was its exhibition, of the man whose life has been spent in the conquest of material things, to the man who has the audacity, insensate though it seem, to fling these to the winds in his search after ideals. Now Victoria, who still has only a slight glimpse of the politics that are running deep, and who trusts her father, has overheard an incriminating conversation that makes her think a little bit. They passed within a few feet of Victoria, who resisted an almost uncontrollable impulse to rise and confront them. The words given her to use were surging in her brain, and yet she withheld them. Why, she knew not. Perhaps it was because, after such communion as the afternoon had brought, the repulsion she felt for Mr. Tooting aided her to sit where she was. She heard the outside door open and close, and she saw Humphrey Crewe walk past her again into his library, and that door closed, and she was left in darkness. Darkness indeed for Victoria, who throughout her life had lived in light alone, in the light she had shed, and the light which she had kindled in others. With a throb which was an exquisite pain, she understood now the compassion in Austen's eyes, and she saw so simply and clearly why he had not told her that her face burned with the shame of her demand. The one of all others to whom she could go in this trouble was denied her, and his lips were sealed, who would have spoken honestly and without prejudice. She rose and went quietly out into the biting winter night, and stood staring through the trees at the friendly reddened windows of... She rose and went quietly out into the biting winter night, and stood staring through the trees at the friendly reddened windows of the little cottage across the way, with a yearning that passed her understanding. Out of those windows, to Victoria, shone honesty and truth, and the peace which these alone may bring. Now, that little exchange that Austen and Hilary had together, that is continued throughout the book. This is really about them, the whole story. Austen got to his feet. His own expression, curiously enough, had not changed to one of anger. His face had set, but his eyes held the look that seemed still to express compassion, and what he felt was a sorrow that went to the depths of his nature. What he had so long feared, what he knew they had both feared, had come at last. "Goodbye, Judge," he said. Hilary Vane stared at him dumbly. His anger had not cooled, his eyes still flamed, but he suddenly found himself bereft of speech. Austen put his hand on his father's shoulder and looked down silently into his face. But Hilary was stiff as in a rigor, expressionless save for the defiant red in his eye. "I don't think you meant all that, Judge, and I don't intend to hold it against you." No further, this is kind of a follow-up to all that. Empires crack before they crumble, and the first cracks seem easily mended, even as they have been mended before. A revolt in Gaul, or Britain, or Thrace is little to be minded, and a prophet in Judea less. And yet, into him who sits in the seat of power, a premonition of something impending gradually creeps, a premonition which he will not acknowledge, will not define. Yesterday, by the pointing of a finger, he created a province. Today he dares not, but consoles himself by saying he does not wish to point. No antagonist worthy of his steel has openly defied him, worthy of recognition by the opposition of a legion, but the sense of security has been subtly and indefinably shaken. I found this paragraph interesting. Let's say that. And now here we are. This is Austen's showdown at the end with the railroad magnate, Mr. Flint himself. "After all," he added, in a lower tone, and with a slight gesture characteristic of him when a subject was distasteful, "it doesn't matter who is elected governor this autumn." "What?" cried Mr. Flint, surprised out of his attitude as much by Austen's manner as by Austen's words. "It doesn't matter," said Austen. "Whether the northeastern railroads have succeeded this time in nominating and electing a governor to whom they can dictate, and who will reappoint railroad commissioners and other state officials in their interests. The practices by which you have controlled the state, Mr. Flint, and elected governors and councilors and state and national senators, are doomed. However necessary these practices may have been from your point of view, they violated every principle of free government, and were they to continue, the nation to which we belong would inevitably decay and become the scorn of the world. Those practices depended for their success on one condition, which in itself is the most serious of ills in a republic, the ignorance and disregard of the voter. You have but to read the signs of the times to see clearly that the day of such conditions is past, to see that the citizens of this state and this country are thinking for themselves as they should, are alive to the danger, and determined to avert it. You may succeed in electing one more governor and one more senate, or two, before the people are able to destroy the machinery you have built up, and repeal the laws you have made to sustain it. I repeat, it doesn't matter in the long run. The era of political domination by a corporation, and mainly for the benefit of a corporation, is over. And there you have it. I really don't need to go into it anymore, I don't think. Read it for yourself, and do please let me know what you think in the comments. So we have had another heck of a week, haven't we? And I'm sure we've got another one ahead. So these are the interesting times that we live in. Hang in there as best as you can, and I will see you next week. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye now.